Hey there, my name is Daniel Yang, and I'd like to talk about disciple making in the different season in which it occurs. But specifically, I want to talk about disciple making in the context of community. There are a lot of ways to think about discipleship making. For instance, helping somebody to better understand the Bible, reading the Bible. That's a form or an expression or a tool or strategy in disciple making. Helping somebody to share the gospel or share their testimony with other people who don't yet know Jesus. That's another tool, or that's another expression, or another strategy in disciple making. But I want to talk about being a part of a group of people, a discipleship group, a discipleship community. And I want us to help us think about disciple making in the context of belonging to a group in the different seasons that that group goes in, and what might you emphasize in those seasons. Because in some ways, just like family systems, just like any kind of group systems, friends, any system that has a group of people that belong to each other and they're doing something, there tends to be seasons and cycles. You see this in your own family. You see this probably even in your marriage. You see this probably in your workplaces. But when you're doing something with a group of people and you're experiencing identity formation, you're experiencing accomplishing goals, you're experiencing how to either grow your group or strengthen your group, there's always seasons and there's always things to focus in that season. So what I'd like to talk about is the seasons that a group experiences, especially when that group is focused on disciple making. So we're going to talk about discipleship seasons, again, in the context of communities. And I think it's important for us to think about three dimensions or three aspects or three seasons that disciple making groups go through. So when you're committed to a group of people, and you might be a new believer and you just became a brand new Christian, or you're actually somebody who is exploring faith, or you may be somebody who's been a mature Christian and you're journeying with a group of people and you're asking, what season are we in as a group? I know individually, everybody in this group may be in individual seasons, but what season is our group in? And so I'm going to give you three seasons or three ways to think about the different seasons that groups go through. One is oftentimes they're going through an envisioning season. It's a season devoted to receiving and communicating biblical kingdom objectives. So your group, even though you may be coming from different spiritual journeys and stages of maturity, when you come together, there's a season in which you're saying, hey, what brings us together? And how do we receive and how do we communicate what it is that's bringing us together? So, for instance, sometimes a disparate people come together into a group because they're doing something like alpha. So alpha could be the reason why. So there is an envisioning process. We're coming together for a 12-week journey to ask questions about the Christian faith. Sometimes people come together because they are trying to reach another particular group of people. And so they're a community focused on mission. Sometimes people are coming together because they're studying the book of John. But there's a season in which you're really trying to intentionally focus on envisioning what are we about, okay? And then there's a season in which you begin developing relationships, a season devoted to meaningfully relating and nurturing people in Christian fellowship. And so this dynamic is usually kind of a rhythm of getting to know each other, getting to spend time, not be strangers, understanding who's all in the group, who's all a part of this, who's the makeup, what's the realm of our responsibility of those that we're making disciples of. And then thirdly is mission expansion. It sounds like a kind of a awkward term, not that you're expanding like your little kingdom or fiefdom, but you're expanding God's work. You're expanding a particular work. You're doing things outside of yourselves. You're actually trying to create change. You're reaching people evangelistically. you're trying to expand the kingdom of God. It's a season devoted to responding to missional vision in obedience to Jesus, mobilizing others to do the same. Now, most of us would think, especially if you're type A and you're like, we can do it all. We can do it all. Like, let's do all three things all at once, every time, nonstop, right? So this is where a lot of people would like to operate, because they think, I think, that if we can do all three things well all at the same time, then we would be like the super discipleship group. And so from December to, January to December, you're like full speed and you're just like, man, let's just be this group where we're hearing from God and we're studying the Bible and we're praying like crazy, but we're also like fellowshipping like crazy, and then we're also like doing outreach like crazy, and we think like that's where but what's that a good recipe for? I mean, burnout, right? And so no discipleship group can function like at the intersection of these three things all of the time. And so for many discipleship groups, they actually tend to kind of be good in a certain few things. Some groups are good at envisioning, and they're really, they're always talking about what they want to do. Others are really relationship building oriented. So, they have great food, and they're always like, they're the closest group. And then others are just always great at getting out there and doing evangelism. But the reality is that most discipleship groups in their journeys, they're really good at one particular combination of these things. And but the reality is that when you're trying to pay attention to what do we need to step into, it's important to ask, where are we strongest and where have we been, so that we know how to kind of work towards the next season appropriately. You'll see what I mean by that in just a second here. So, for instance, if you were to take these three distinct seasons and kind of like try to discern, again, everybody's kind of strong, every group's kind of strong in one particular thing or the other. Like, what are the mixes of these particular seasons? What are the transitions? Like, you're going from one season to another season, or you're at a transitional point in these seasons. What do those transitional seasons really look like? And this is a discernment tool, because if you are coaching or leading groups or group leaders, then you want to help them be able to discern, where are you at today, so that you can focus on the right kinds of energies to either nurture that moment or to kind of bridge you towards the next moment. You understand kind of what this is actually trying to get at? You're discerning what season, what transition we're in. So either for nurturing the group in that particular season, so you might actually have to really focus on different people to help them understand where you're at and where they might fit in the journey of the group. And then also, if need be, how do we resource so that we can move on to the next season that's appropriate for us? So if you're in the season of envisioning and relationship building, this is usually a season in groups where people are learning to hear God together about what makes them unique, what's their common purpose, and how they are to care for one another. This season is marked by prayer, worship, listening to God and one another. And this is a time where you think, you've been wondering, somebody had this idea, they want to really reach young men, and they've got a group of young men together, and now men are coming from different backgrounds, and so they're asking the question, like, what makes us unique? What do we want to do? You're hearing from God. Maybe as a leader, you're hearing from God, and you need to have someone be an apprentice alongside of you, and you're trying to figure out like the vision aspect of what brings us together. And so this is probably a season of intense prayer and worship and listening to God and hearing from the different groups of people. This is a season where you don't really want to rush, because again, you're hearing from God and you're hearing from one another. A lot of times people will then begin focusing in on activity, lots of activity. Let's do a lot of social things. Let's do a lot of outreach things. But the reality is that in this season is where you begin to hear from God as a disciple maker about like where individuals are at and how this person over here can be helpful to this person over here. And it's really in paying attention to those dynamics that you become stronger, and you begin to realize that I'm not just the disciple maker in this group, but actually I'm helping facilitating disciple making amongst this existing group. It's vision oriented, but it's oriented around building a better relationship with one another and then with God. God may call us to do more things outside of our group, outside of our current activity, But right now, we're really devoted to helping to understand one another in God's purpose for our group. And then oftentimes there is a transition that happens. And so there is a bent or a move towards, you're still envisioning, but you're actually now executing some things that are outside of the group, which is mission expansion and envisioning. And this is a season in which discipleship groups are, people are becoming more aware of who they are corporately. Like, well, we understand what this group is about and what makes us effective in the way that we are reaching out to others. And so what makes us, like, when people see us as a group, they understand, oh, this is why you guys are effective. Or at least to begin to understand or receive the benefits of what makes you an effective group. And so I know that, I'm not talking about like, oh, people are now having a better understanding of, what the Old Testament is, the New Testament is. Like that's kind of implicit to this. But the assumption here is that when a person is a part of a discipleship group and these dynamics of social relationships, these dynamics of outreach, these dynamics of hearing God together, again, with the assumption that there's Bible reading and prayer at the core of this, then you're placing them in a journey and in a history of a collective group of people that's journeying towards Jesus together. And in this season or in this stage where there is more activity, there's more, there's development of new relationships. You're actually reaching out to people and bringing them in, and you're realizing that I'm not mature enough to disciple this person. I need to get more mature. There's dynamics of now multi-generational discipleship. As the person making disciple, you're then probably at this point you're discerning in this season. I need to have other people invest in me as I invest into other people. How do I multiply out our influence? How do I not hoard ministry to myself? How do I help other people come alongside of me? If I'm in this season right now and I see new people coming in through our outreach, then I'm actually thinking, okay, how do I help somebody who can become a co-leader or a co-disciple maker alongside so that we can actually share some of the burden and responsibility of making sure that people are growing in their faith? And then part of that is just you're developing new leaders. So you're still envisioning. We have a mission together as a group. People are joining us because they're seeing something happened and it's relevant to who they are and what they're and what they want to become. And so the internal members of that group, of the discipleship group, are beginning to see that I have responsibility in helping these other folks. I have responsibility to helping those that are helping me. And I have a responsibility to myself to grow. So this is a season in which mission is expanding and you're still envisioning. But as you can imagine, it's kind of like any kind of bell curve. There's kind of the incline, and then there's that peak, and then there's kind of a downward. And down doesn't necessarily mean bad, but there's a season where you're focusing on relationship building and mission expansion. So you haven't forsaken the fact that we have a mission together as a group, that there's a group of people that we're called to, or a particular thing that we're called to accomplish. You're not neglecting that, but you realize that in this season, our energies need to be focused on repairing relationships, to self-care, paying attention to the strength of the group again. There is an intentional focus on evaluation. What have we been doing? This is hard for some people because sometimes evaluation can mean critique, but it also means celebration. And, a part of maturity of a person is to admit that there are wins and then there are losses when we're in disciple making. There are times when you have to mourn things. And mourning is a part of letting things go so that you can move forward. This is an appropriate time where you're intentionally focusing in on these things. You're having these deep conversations. You might have weeks blocked out where the group conversations are around, what have you lost? What has this past season meant to you? You're not abandoning a mission. You're not saying that we're not called to do these things anymore, but what you're saying is that for the health of what God's called us to do, let us be present and let's lament where we need to lament. Let's celebrate where we need to celebrate. Let's pray and fast about things that we need to purge so that we can be more useful in the next season. This is a season marked by rest, reflection, rejuvenation, and helping new people meaningfully belong. These are, again, transition points in the life journey of a discipleship group. if we were to just kind of simplify this, and let's just say you can say this was a 12-month journey for a discipleship group, or you can say this was a 3-month journey for a discipleship group. There's different cycles or time spans within these cycles, and there's no set limit that you're going to be going through this season for this particular long period of time. But when you understand that these are the rhythms that groups go through in disciple making, you as the disciple maker or the team, you can begin to pull from resources that can help you in this next season. So, for instance, let's say you're in this season where your relationship building and mission expanding, you're saying we want to move forward for the sake of mission, but we want to do it in a healthy way. Then as a leader, you're probably then asking, okay, who's around us that's still with us? Not that anybody's against you, but sometimes people, they need to opt out, they need to bow out. Sometimes they realize that, I need to be a part of a different environment, and that's completely okay. But in the case where, in your discipleship group, people begin to say, okay, well, yeah, I'm still for this, but how do we rejuvenate? The discipleship leader can then begin asking for the right kinds of resources. Well, we need to go to a retreat. We need a retreat. We actually needed to plan a time where we bring somebody in to invest in us. And we need to kick off this year by doing a retreat together. And that's a very normal thing. As a matter of fact, a lot of discipleship groups, disciple makers, use catalytic events like a retreat or a conference to really get the energy going, to really get new revelation for the season ahead. Sometimes it's about like getting away so that you can understand, okay, actually, we need to return to like just a deep study in the book of Acts. And we're going to spend 3 months studying the book of Acts together so that all of us can have a better framework for what we're doing. Because sometimes you get lost in activity, you forget the bigger picture, the perspective, the framework for what you're doing. But these transitory seasons are helpful for you to have these evaluative moments so that you can plan better for how to engage currently, but then also for the season that's ahead. So you can almost guess already that in some ways there's a little bit of a rhythmic step to this. So usually you start out with envisioning and building relationships, and then you kind of move on to mission expansion, and you're still envisioning, but you're kind of moving. Things are kind of maybe going, and then you're evaluating for the purpose of really coming back to envisioning. So it's cyclical. It's like you experience this in your family life as well. You have seasons in which you're really focused on developing relationships, with your siblings or with your children, and then other times you were like, okay, we're good, let's really be a resource for other people outside of our family, and then that exhausts you because you've given too much to other people, so you have to come back and rejuvenate. That whole process is a healthy cycle for people to go through. And the reason why I put all of this in the context of a discipleship group is because discipleship really doesn't reach its full potential until an individual is plugged into the context of a greater whole. That's why community is the best environment for discipleship. It doesn't mean that one-on-ones aren't important. It doesn't mean that a person's own spiritual disciplines aren't important. But it's the group dynamic that helps, a leader find, what resources do we need in this moment. You can always do that for an individual. But then what's important for the life cycle of a group together is for you to be able to see what are all the different dynamics happening here, strengths, weaknesses, because that doesn't fall on one person, it falls on a group of people. And then you begin to see that, okay, in this season, this is what we need. And so you begin to evaluate and find resources for that particular season. We need a book study. We need to do a retreat. We need to have somebody come in and train us. And so there are things that you can do all throughout the calendar year or the life cycle of the discipleship group that will give variety in the way that will help you move along in these seasons and in these rhythmic steps for a discipleship group. I hope you find that helpful, and I hope that gives you a framework for thinking about how to evaluate where those that you're discipling right now are at so that you might better draw on other resources to help you move forward. God bless you.